The Sackler family made $13 billion from one drug, OxyContin. This is how they created the addiction trap that killed 500,000 Americans. And why not one of them went to prison? How did this happen? How did a family of doctors, sworn to do no harm, unleash a plague of addiction and death? This is a story of a miracle drug, a marketing blitz built on lies, and a family that knowingly built an empire on an ocean of pain. The name Sackler. You'll find it etched in gold on the walls of the world's most prestigious institutions. The Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Louvre, Harvard, Oxford. For decades, that name meant immense wealth, high culture, and incredible generosity. It was the American dream, cranked up to 11. The story of three brothers, sons of a Brooklyn grocer, who became doctors and built a dynasty. They were celebrated as patrons of art and science, their legacies seemingly cast in marble. But behind that polished facade, a different story was unfolding, a much, much darker one. While one hand was publicly donating millions, the other was setting the stage for a national catastrophe. To understand the opioid crisis, you have to go back, before OxyContin, before Purdue Pharma became a household name for all the wrong reasons. You have to understand a man who wrote the playbook, Arthur Sackler. Born in 1913, Arthur was the eldest of the three brothers and the undisputed visionary. He and his younger brothers, Mortimer and Raymond, all became psychiatrists. But Arthur's real genius wasn't in the clinic. It was in the marketplace. Back in the 40s and 50s, pharmaceutical advertising was a sleepy affair, confined to dry, text-heavy ads in medical journals. Arthur saw an untapped frontier. He believed selling medicine could be just as persuasive as selling Coca-Cola. He bought a small ad agency and completely revolutionized it. Arthur's approach was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, aimed not at patients, but at the gatekeepers, doctors. He pioneered techniques that are now standard practice. He pushed for glossy, full-color ads. He flooded doctors' offices with direct mail campaigns. He armed armies of sales reps to forge personal relationships with physicians, bearing gifts, free samples, and company-sponsored studies. His big break came with a drug you've definitely heard of, Valium. Working for Hoffman La Roche, Arthur's agency had to market two similar tranquilizers, Librium and Valium. How do you sell two nearly identical products? You don't sell the chemical. You sell the cure. It was like selling not just a hammer, but the dream of a beautiful home, while convincing people that even a slightly crooked picture on the wall was a structural crisis needing a nail. Arthur's team brilliantly segmented the market. Librium was for general anxiety. But Valium? That was for something more specific, more sophisticated. Psychic tension. Ads targeted educated women, suggesting Valium could ease the stresses of modern life. They even encouraged doctors to prescribe it to patients with no diagnosable psychiatric condition at all. One ad literally said, "For this kind of patient, with no demonstrable pathology, consider the usefulness of Valium." The message was clear. There's a pill for every problem, real or imagined. The strategy worked phenomenally. Valium became the first drug to top $100 million in sales. Arthur Sackler became obscenely rich. He had created the playbook. Identify a market, create a story, and aggressively push that story directly to doctors, blurring the line between medical education and a sales pitch. He always insisted that doctors couldn't be bought, yet his entire business model was a blueprint for how to influence them. While Arthur was mastering the art of the sale, his brothers, Mortimer and Raymond, were running a small drug company they bought in 1952, Purdue Frederick. It was a modest business, making things like earwax remover and laxatives. Arthur passed away in 1987, years before OxyContin was launched, but the marketing DNA he pioneered was inherited by his brothers and his nephew, Richard Sackler. They now had the company, and they had the playbook. All they needed was the right product. By the early 90s, the Sacklers at Purdue were hunting for their Valium, a blockbuster drug that could rake in billions. They found their answer in a powerful and familiar chemical, OxyContin. Now, OxyContin wasn't new. It was developed in Germany back in 1916, and it was known to be potent and highly addictive, similar to morphine or heroin. For decades, doctors used it sparingly, mostly for severe short-term pain. like after surgery or for cancer patients near the end of their lives. The medical community was, correctly, terrified of its addictive power, but Purdue had an idea. They thought they'd found a way to tame the demon inside, OxyContin. Their innovation was a new delivery system, a continuous-release formula they called Contin. The pill was designed to dissolve slowly over 12 hours, delivering a steady, low dose of the painkiller. Think of it like a slow, steady forward drip instead of a sudden, powerful injection. It was a way to make a dangerous drug seem gentle. The theory was simple. By eliminating the euphoric rush of traditional painkillers, you could provide long-lasting pain relief without the risk of addiction. This was their central marketing claim, the very foundation of the empire. They weren't just selling a painkiller. They were selling a revolutionary idea, that you could have the power of a strong opioid without the danger. With this idea in hand, Purdue went to the Food and Drug Administration, FDA. And this is where the system designed to protect us gets compromised. The application was handled by a single FDA examiner, Dr. Curtis Wright. Purdue's team met with him extensively, lobbying for a specific label that would give them a huge marketing advantage. And they got it. In 1995, the FDA approved OxyContin. The final package insert contained a sentence that would be worth billions to the Sacklers and would cost hundreds of thousands of lives. It read, "Delayed absorption, as provided by OxyContin tablets, is believed to reduce the abuse liability of the drug." That one sentence was a marketing atom bomb. It was unbelievable. The FDA, the nation's top regulator, was essentially endorsing the idea that this powerful opioid was safer than others. The problem? Purdue had conducted 0 clinical studies to prove this. They had no long-term data on addiction. The belief it was less addictive was like building a skyscraper based on the belief that gravity might take a day off. It was a marketing theory, not science. It was such a flimsy claim that Dr. Wright himself would later downplay in court, calling it an extremely weak statement. But for Purdue's sales team, it was gospel. And what happened to Dr. Curtis Wright, the man who approved the drug and its game-changing label? About a year after leaving the FDA, he was hired by Purdue Pharma itself, with a starting salary reportedly 3 times what he'd earned as a public servant. The revolving door between regulator and regulated had spun once again. The stage was set. Purdue had its miracle drug, its government-approved sales pitch, and Arthur Sackler's aggressive marketing playbook. The blizzard was about to begin. When Purdue launched OxyContin in 1996, they did it with the fervor of a crusade. They weren't just launching a product. They were on a mission to liberate Americans from the tyranny of chronic pain. But behind that noble facade was the largest and most deceptive marketing campaign for a narcotic in history. At the launch party, Richard Sackler, Arthur's nephew, told the sales team to imagine a hurricane, an earthquake. Then he declared, "The launch of OxyContin tablets will be followed by a blizzard of prescriptions that will bury the competition. The prescription blizzard will be so deep, dense, and white." It was a chillingly prophetic choice of words. The strategy was multi-pronged. First, they built an army. Purdue massively expanded its sales force with one laser-focused mission: sell OxyContin. Reps were armed with talking points that relentlessly hammered home the message of safety. Their core claim? The risk of addiction was less than 1%. This stat was cherry-picked and wildly misleading, based on a small study of hospitalized patients in a controlled setting. Not people taking pills at home for months on end. But it sounded scientific, and they repeated it so often it became truth. Second, they created a revolutionary bonus structure. Unlike most pharma companies, Purdue's sales bonuses were unlimited. This turned their reps into bounty hunters, with a rep's income tied directly to the dosage and volume of OxyContin they pushed. This created a feeding frenzy. Reps who flipped doctors into high-volume prescribers could earn hundreds of thousands in bonuses. Their incentive wasn't public health. It was pure profit. Third, they perfected targeting. Using data that tracks doctor prescribing habits, Purdue mapped out the American medical landscape. Like expert fishermen who know exactly where the fish are biting, they focus on doctors who already prescribe the most opioids, especially general practitioners in places like Appalachia, where physically demanding jobs led to high rates of chronic pain. These doctors were inundated with visits, gifts, and all-expenses-paid trips to pain management seminars in sunny places like Florida and Arizona. Fourth, they funded an entire ecosystem of propaganda. They paid thousands of doctors to be company speakers. They funded nonprofits that lobbied for more aggressive pain treatment. They created educational videos and pamphlets, all reinforcing one idea. Pain was being dangerously undertreated, and OxyContin was a safe solution. And when doctors started reporting that patients were showing signs of addiction, crushing pills, demanding early refills, Purdue had a twisted explanation. It wasn't addiction, they argued. It was pseudo-addiction. This was a bizarre theory claiming that if a patient looked like an addict, it was actually a sign their pain was being undertreated. The solution? Increase the dose. It was like a firefighter telling you that the smoke pouring out of your house is a sign of fire, but a sign it's too cold inside and needs more gasoline. It was a perfect closed loop of logic that always led back to more sales. To fine-tune this sales machine, Purdue even brought in the prestigious consulting firm McKinsey & Company. McKinsey advised them on how to turbocharge sales by specifically targeting the highest prescribing doctors with even more aggressive marketing. The blizzard Richard Sackler wished for had arrived. Between 1996 and 2001, annual prescriptions for OxyContin shot up from 670,000 to over 6.2 million. The Sackler family was on its way to becoming one of the wealthiest in America, and all across the country, the body count was starting to rise. The blizzard of white pills didn't just bury the competition. It buried entire communities. The line between Purdue's marketing and the explosion of addiction and death is direct and undeniable. The crisis hit in waves, each one more devastating than the last. The first wave started in the late 90s, driven by the flood of prescription opioids. Doctors, armed with a less than 1% myth, started prescribing OxyContin for everything: back pain, arthritis, work injuries. The pills flowed into medicine cabinets in towns that had never seen this level of narcotic presence. Soon, the brutal reality of oxycodone hit. Patients who started on the drug for legitimate pain found themselves physically dependent. The safe, time-release mechanism was a lock that was easily broken. By crushing a single pill, users could get an instant, powerful, heroin-like high. The pills, known on the street as oxy or hillbilly heroin, took over the illicit drug market. The social fabric of entire regions, particularly in rural America, began to tear apart. Crime rates soared. Kids went to live with their grandparents. Overdose deaths, once a rarity, became horrifically common. Since 1999, the United States has seen nearly 1.3 million people die from a drug overdose. In 2023 alone, there were nearly 80,000 deaths involving an opioid. That's an average of 217 people every single day. The second wave began around 2010. Facing public pressure, Purdue finally reformulated OxyContin to make it harder to crush. But it was too late. An entire generation was now addicted. When prescription pills got harder to find, millions turned to a cheaper, more available alternative: heroin. Then came the third and most deadly wave around 2013. Drug cartels, seeing a massive new market of opioid-addicted Americans, began flooding the country with illicitly manufactured fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. Fentanyl is now the primary driver of overdose deaths in the U.S. In fact, of the opioid-related overdose deaths in 2023, over 90% involve synthetics like fentanyl. People who thought they were buying heroin or even a counterfeit OxyContin pill were unknowingly taking a lethal dose. This three-wave tsunami of death can be traced back to one origin point: the deceptive marketing of a single prescription drug. And as the Sacklers' fortune swelled into the tens of billions, their true, unspoken monument was being built in morgues and graveyards across the nation. As the body count rose, did Purdue and the Sacklers rush to fix things? No. They doubled down with a cynical new strategy: deny, deflect, and wage legal war to protect their profits. Their main tactic was to shift the blame from their drug to the people who got addicted to it. This came from the top. In a 2001 email, as proof of widespread abuse became impossible to ignore, Richard Sackler wrote, We have to hammer on the abusers in every way possible. They are the culprits and the problem. They are reckless criminals. This blame the abuser narrative became company doctrine. It was like a car manufacturer blaming drivers for crashes caused by faulty brakes they knowingly installed. Publicly, Purdue acted like a responsible company blindsided by criminals misusing its product. But internally, they knew which doctors were running pill mills, prescribing absurd amount of OxyContin, but often failed to cut them off because they were the most profitable customers. The first major legal reckoning came in 2007. The U.S. Department of Justice brought a case, and Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty to felony charges of misbranding OxyContin with intent to defraud or mislead. The company and 3 executives admitted they'd lied about the drug's addiction risk. They paid over $600 million in fines. For most companies, a felony conviction is a death blow. For Purdue, it was just the cost of doing business. That fine was like a speeding ticket for a bank robber who just pulled off a multi-billion-dollar heist. No member of the Sackler family was charged, and crucially, they were allowed to keep selling OxyContin. So that's exactly what they did. In the years that followed, a flood of lawsuits from nearly every state, city, and county hit Purdue and the Sacklers personally. These suits unearthed a mountain of damning evidence, laying bare the family's direct involvement and cold indifference. Perhaps most infamous is Richard Sackler's 2015 deposition. For hours, he smirked and deflected, denying any responsibility for crisis. When asked if the family had any responsibility for the opioid epidemic, his answer was a simple no. As the legal pressure mounted, the Sacklers allegedly started moving their money, funneling billions out of Purdue and into offshore trusts to shield their personal fortune. Finally, facing an avalanche of lawsuits, Purdue took its final defensive step. In September 2019, the company filed for bankruptcy. It wasn't an admission of defeat. It was a calculated legal strategy, like a corner chess player flipping the board over to force a draw. It froze all the lawsuits and forced a settlement that would grant them permanent immunity from ever being sued over OxyContin again. The story of the Sackler family is a complex one, and holding powerful people accountable requires public pressure and awareness. If you want to see more deep dives into the systems that shape our world, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you or someone you know has been affected by the opioid crisis, we've included links to resources in the description below. Sharing this video also helps make sure that stories like this aren't forgotten. From a small company making laxatives to the center of a health crisis, the story of Purdue Pharma is a modern tragedy. It began with Arthur Sackler's idea to sell medicine like any other consumer good. It culminated in his family taking that playbook and applying it to a dangerously addictive narcotic. They told doctors it was safe. They told regulators it was less abusable. They told their sales reps that patients showing signs of addiction just needed a higher dose. Every single one was a calculated deception designed to sell more pills. In the process, they made billions. They put their name on museums while their product devastated small towns. The empire they built wasn't one of art, but one of addiction, pain, and loss. And while their name is now being scraped off the walls, the scars it left on America will be there for generations to come.